Right, welcome everybody. Very excited to have a special guest here with us today. Welcome to Facilities Unfiltered. This is where we have real conversations with people shaping the future of facilities, operations, and the brands that we all know and love. I'm Matt Singer, CEO of Ecotrak. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by my friend Jim Balis, partner and head of the Strategic Operations Group at CapitalSpring. Jim has more than 40 years of restaurant leadership experience. Since joining CapitalSpring in 2014, he's worked with restaurant brands to improve operations, support growth, and solve complex business challenges. Over his career, Jim has served as CEO of more than 15 restaurant companies, including Sizzling Platter, Buddy's Pizza, and Norm's Restaurants. He also serves on the boards of more than 10 restaurant companies, giving him a unique perspective on where the industry is headed. Jim has spent decades helping restaurant brands grow stronger from the C-suite to the front lines. And today we're talking about leadership, operations, facilities, and what it takes to build resilient organizations in a changing industry. Jim, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Facilities Unfiltered.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Happy to be
So
here.
excited. So excited to have you here. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I really want to dig into your journey. I think you have a really fascinating story. And it sounds like you started in restaurants in high school in New York and just want to understand, like, how did it go from, managing local restaurants to leading large national brands? Was this always a plan or how did you fall
It
into
was,
this?
it was not at all. I got really lucky. I was, started when I was 14 as a dishwasher. I've pretty much worked every single position in a restaurant, front of the house, back of the house, manager, district manager, you name it. Ended up starting an advisory firm called the Restaurant Management Group many years ago. And CapitalSpring was a client of mine. And that's how I developed the relationship there. And yeah, it was rest is history. Joined the firm right around 13 or 14 years ago. So
Wow, very cool. That's awesome. So it all started with local restaurants, and then you started your own practice, and then kind of fell into Capital Spring. That's how it all played out.
correct.
Very
Yeah, I
cool.
can say that, as a dishwasher, I wanted to be part of a private equity firm.
I can imagine. Well, talk to me a little bit about Capital Spring and Strategic Operations Group. For anyone that really doesn't know the firm, what does it mean to advise over 100 portfolio companies across 90 brands? And what does your day-to-day actually look like?
Yeah, well, CapitalSpring, as I think you know, Matt, we're a restaurant investment firm. So, we're not quite like private equity, but we operate somewhat similarly. But we invest in everything from like young emerging brands that might have 4 or 5 units upwards to, businesses like Sizzling Platter that when we invested there, they had, over 300. So, um, my role is, meeting with a lot of different operators, understanding their business, where we can maybe look for opportunities to invest and how we can strategically support them, and then diligencing prior to making the investment. And then post-close, are there ways that we can support those businesses to help them grow and improve? I love spending time with other operators in the restaurants, seeing and helping them. And we're not really not like a big brother for restaurants where we're looking over their shoulder and telling them cut this or don't do that, drive EBITDA here. It's much more about, okay, what's the DNA of the business and how do we grow this business by not just writing a check, but really being a strategic partner. And that's what I love doing. And that's a lot of my day to day.
And I think that's really unique, the approach you guys take. And, we've had the pleasure of working with some of your brands, and I can, share that it's so nice to work with the brands, understand like how they interact with Capital Spring, and you really do, promote, what makes them special. And yeah, would love to hear from you. I know, Sizzling Platter, Norm's, Buddy Pizza, those are the ones I'm a little more familiar with. But, what chapter, as you've kind of taken on these more active roles and management, which chapters really taught you the most and why?
Which chapters?
Like working as a CEO of Sizzling Platter or Norms, like is there anything that you've picked up on the way where you're like, oh gosh, this has really set me up to do better, working across more organizations or, what have you picked up along the way that you can share with everyone?
I mean, I think really. you know, each of them teach you different things in different ways. When we invested in Norms, the entire sort of C-suite left day one.
Wow.
And so we had to be prepared to step in and take over really without even a transition in that business. So that, presented some of its own challenges, and there was a lot to learn
I bet.
there. Um, where normally you have somewhat of a transition period. And then, Sizzling Platter was really a great learning exercise for me because, we set very aggressive goals out of the gate. And, it required, I would say a really strong team to achieve what we ultimately did achieve in the growth trajectory of that business. And so, learning how to scale the support center alongside of the unit growth was a great learning exercise, and how to really surround yourself with phenomenal people that were a lot smarter than you to help achieve those goals.
That's awesome. I heard you say that you started with Sizzling Platter when they had a few hundred units, and I think you helped grow that into an 800 plus unit multi-branded franchisee as you were the leader. What breaks first when a company's scaling that fast, and how do you get ahead of it? Obviously, having good people, but what do you put in place to get ahead of any of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, when you're growing that quickly, and keep in mind that type of growth is a balance of, M&A, so it's locations you're buying from other franchisees.
Yeah.
It's adding new brands, right? Because when we were there, I think while I was running that business, we added like three or four brands to the portfolio. Um, and then it's organic growth. So, you're growing in different ways, right? New brands, acquisitions, organic. And I think, on the acquisition side, it's, a lot of having great support center and above store who are fantastic listeners and learners. So as you acquire, whether it's a new brand or an existing franchisee, I'd always ask my teams to let's, for the first 90 days, tell me all the things they're doing better than we are. Let's
Yeah.
not go in there with a critical eye of like, we're doing it better, they're doing it worse, but let's look at it from the reverse perspective. And it was a big shift, I think, for the team, and yielded a lot of really positive results because we ended up copying those practices where they were better. And I think on the organic side, the growth management really was around training. I'm a big believer. It's strange coming from an investor group to speak about training because it doesn't have like a really clear defined ROI. But in the
Hmm.
long run, to set yourself up for success, it's so important to have your teams trained. So when they open new stores, I would oftentimes share with my team, we're making big investments. If we're going to open 50 stores at, over $500,000 per store, it's a huge investment each time we open one of these. Let's make sure we're setting ourselves up for success and training our people to be successful. And I think that that training piece is critical.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to talk through is a lot of investment groups come in and they're looking at the numbers side. And I think understanding the DNA, listening to what has worked and really tailoring to training, I think that's really what has set you apart and set Capital Spring apart as an investor. So that's awesome perspective. You've been a part of over 90 brands at every stage of growth. When you're looking at operators, like what skills have really stood out as things that make those operators successful as they're scaling, or what challenges have you seen them come across that have kind of make them stall, in their process of growth?
I mean, I really think it all starts at the top with leadership. And, when I say that, it's not as if it's, there's no I in team, right? So the team is definitely important, but the leadership, the culture that you set, I think is very important. And that leadership really, to be successful, in my opinion, it requires the type of leadership that is truth seeking. So, hey, we made a mistake. It was our fault. Did we make a mistake for the right reasons? What were the data points into the decision making? So I think truth seeking, humility, constantly wanting to learn, being a great listener, all these things play into, being a great leader. And then it's okay, let's set very clearly defined goals that, are perhaps quarterly. And then let's check in with ourselves. How are we performing against those? And making sure that the communication is very clear. So at any
Mhm.
point in time, if you ask your team, okay, what's our 5-year plan? What's our 1-year plan? And how are we tracking against it? Everybody would answer exactly the same way because everybody has a clear vision of what that North Star is.
Yeah.
And I think, if your leadership skills encompass a lot of what I shared, and you have this very clear, defined communication with set of goals, and you hold yourself accountable to those, I think you set yourself up for success.
I think that's amazing. And I'm learning from you too today, which is awesome. I think sometimes you, as a leader, you get so busy and you're always moving on to the next thing, but taking a step back and like really making sure you're sharing the vision and like keeping everybody focused on that longer term plan. I think that's huge. And, I love what you said about, creating a culture where people feel comfortable trying things, learning. I've heard something in my past where it's like fail quick and fail up, right? Like you want to try things, you're gonna fail. That's okay. Just learn from it and take it into account the next thing you try, and I think creating that culture at the top is awesome.
Agreed.
Talk to me about, as you're evaluating a restaurant business, because obviously you guys are, doing a lot of acquisitions. What kind of diligence are you looking at? New investment, a turnaround? How much weight do you put on facilities and repair and maintenance and some of the spend or what the buildings look like as you're assessing some of those acquisition deals?
And we put a lot of emphasis on it because if you walk into a business that has enormous CapEx or a business that hasn't invested in preventative maintenance, which I think, it's almost like training.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's analogous with training on the facility side, right? Um, you know, it could be very expensive post-close and oftentimes can be a negotiating point on the purchase price. Hey, we have to replace these 6 HVAC units on the roof with a crane because, they're past their lifespan. You haven't been taking care of them, right? And we actually use a gentleman by the name of Jim Largay, and he goes out, actually gets on roofs. He does a full CapEx assessment, including ADA, to make sure that they're compliant with any ADA requirements, specifically in California. So, we put a lot of emphasis and dollars against that type of diligence because it's extremely important.
That's awesome. And I think it's a really good perspective for our listeners to hear is having that investment perspective and how, we as facilities people can really help the business drive a higher purchase price and you retain value and kind of avoid some of those deferred costs or costs that come out of nowhere after a purchase is made. I know we talk a lot at Ecotrak about deferred maintenance, being a silent killer of restaurant P&Ls. How do you think about capital planning across the portfolio and, how much emphasis do you put on, dollars investment and what do you want to, remodel? Um, Talk to me a little bit about how you do that with your portfolio companies.
I mean, it depends a little bit to portfolio company, right? Like a full serve 7,000 square foot box with patios,
Yeah.
against a fast casual inline, right? They have different demands from that perspective. I mean, we definitely are, there is an emphasis on preventative maintenance, as I said before. So that's always written into the budget. It's extremely important, specifically with cooling equipment. We found to make sure you're taking care of that equipment. If that goes down, you could really be in trouble, especially if it goes down at night and nobody's there,
Mhm.
and you wake up this morning and your food's all at the wrong temperature. So I think that's very important. And again, back to the truth seeking, I think, you really have to look at yourself and say, okay, what makes sense, what doesn't? Does this deserve a light refresh or do we need a remodel? Is this a defensive investment or an offensive investment? And
Mhm.
so, I like to say I'm a very fact-based decision maker. I'm not always right, but I try to base it on the facts at least. And yeah, and so I think it's important to make sure that you really do peel the onion back and understand what the investment that you're making because you want to be as efficient with every dollar you deploy as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And I love from an investor standpoint hearing that you really prioritize preventative maintenance. I think a lot of times we see companies just, make that the first thing they cut. And I think cost that comes from that long term can be, really detrimental to a business. So, and you kind of alluded to having more data and making your decision more fact-based. You've been in the industry a long time, 40 years. So you've kind of seen an evolution where you go from gut instinct, like I feel like this is going to break down, or I see things that look like they're going to break, but now you've got a lot of data and you can use that in your decision making. Where are you still seeing operators running on guesswork when maybe they should be using more of the data that's, easy to access nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's still a lot of blind spots despite the evolution in
Yeah.
technology and the amount of data that we have now relative to, what we had when I was, GM, which, that was back when we rode horses and, um,
Been
but,
a few years.
yeah, it's been a few years. Uh, Site selection is certainly an area where we definitely have a blind spot, right?
Yeah.
We do our best to kind of, where are people coming from? What are they spending? What are the demographics? How,
Mhm.
correlated are they to, the data that of our existing portfolio? But there's always blind spots there. And we opened a store when I was at Sizzling Platter that, punched, above its weight class in every site selection box. And it turned out that the street was so busy that nobody wanted to pull off and stop by a restaurant, right? So, a blind spot
Interesting.
that we didn't expect in that particular situation. But I think that's one area. And look, on the equipment side, I think, and you're probably working on something along these lines are,
Hmm.
we should have better insights as to when equipment's going to break down,
Yeah.
right? And, I think the type of business where you operate. So, if you're a pizza place and there's a lot of flour being thrown around, your cooling equipment may be
Yeah.
affected differently than if you're a wing stop where, you have a lot of fryer oil and there's other things that are impacting, different pieces of equipment. So I think, that's another blind spot because when equipment breaks, that's, you're very reliant upon to execute your business. It can really hurt sales. It can aggravate the guest. And so, it would be great if we knew that, but we don't yet.
Yeah. We were close though. I think there's a lot of variables to consider, but yeah, we've got something in the works that should help with that.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think you're right though. It's like how can we be more predictable, but there's still always like the art and science of business. And I think as much as you've got good data and you can trust the numbers, like there's still that gut feeling, especially in site selection. I've done that, in my past, and it's like you got to be there, you got to feel it, you got to drive the streets and really understand what's happening before you make a decision, especially if it's going to be a big investment. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
agree 100%. We would never, I put together our site selection memos at CapitalSpring, and I think on the first page it's who visited it and when
oh,
did they visit it.
that's smart.
Yeah,
Did they drive? And honestly, like daytime, nighttime, like what's the daytime traffic look like? I think getting that sense for what's happening. And even when it comes to facilities, like physically being there, seeing what's happening, like you can look at PMIX data and see, how much the equipment's getting used and everything, how much it's getting maintained. But like, what is the operation? Are they trained on how to use the equipment properly? There's so much that goes into it. So yeah, that's really interesting. Talk to me about margins. I know, I hear all the time margins are getting thinner and thinner and, labor, food costs, occupancy. What are the operational disciplines that, actually impact the P&L in your perspective? Like where are you putting the most emphasis right now?
really in two areas. Sales and top line revenue, right? Because obviously that anytime you generate an additional visit, that helps everything across the P&L.
It's very true.
And then, labor for sure, right? Labor is the biggest line item on our P&L, and it's the one we have the most control over at the end of the day. True control over. And just understanding how to deploy that as efficiently as possible while
Mhm.
balancing hospitality is really been a big focus of ours. And that's, AI is playing a very interesting role. And I think, one great sort of comment about our industry and AI is that boy, by the way, AI should be a drinking game because every time somebody
I'm like, wait, do I have a
taking a
drink?
shot,
We should have thought
uh,
about this beforehand.
but yeah, but I do think that people are still going to go out to restaurants, and I think they're actually going to crave human interaction, and so our business isn't going anywhere. It's just going to get more efficient with AI. So, jobs will they be replaced? potentially, at areas in the support center. Robots probably will eventually play a bigger role back of the house, but our business is really going to see a lot of efficiency from AI, I believe. And, some of the things that we're working on at the Capital Spring level with all of our portfolio companies, we have a dedicated AI person, and he and I have been visiting portfolio companies. I was at one this past Wednesday, and identifying where it can support, on the revenue side and on the labor side to begin with. And that's where we're spending most of our time. We're leaving the facility stuff up to guys like you
I
to
love
figure that
that.
out.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's crazy to see how things are shifting. And I think you're right. I think it's a matter of like that interaction, that experience becomes really important when you're interacting with robots and AI all day. It's like you do want that and you crave that connectivity. So I love that you're trying to use it to really bolster the experience and that, I think jobs are going to shift more to that.
Yeah.
You may lose some of the mundane task work, but you'll shift into like more of that experiential stuff. So yeah, that's interesting.
I
Uh,
wish they had a robot for dishwashing. That's the one thing I haven't seen.
we
You would
talked
think.
about that this week at my board meeting. I'm like, God, that would be amazing. I would love that. Not that I do dishes. I'm fortunate enough to not have to do it very often, but yeah, I think we're close. I think it's coming
Yeah.
sooner than we think. So across all your experience, leading all these companies, like what's been the biggest, like, oh man, didn't see that one coming, like that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is probably a boring answer, but I would probably say like the post-government stimulus. So it's going back a couple of years, right? But if you
Yeah.
remember, everybody, there was so much stimulus money post-COVID,
Yeah.
and we made a few investments, as I'm sure others did, based on historical performance. And it was really being subsidized by the
Mm.
government.
Yeah.
And, as time went on and some of those subsidies went away, and, people all of a sudden couldn't spend $7 on a smoothie or, whatever the business may be, we saw, somewhat of a material unexplained drop off. And I think it was from that. So kind of a boring answer, but that was one that really blindsided me.
Huh. Yeah, honestly, I think it's super interesting. I didn't think of that, and I think you're 100% right. Like consumer spending went way up, people had more discretionary income. So, if you're looking at revenue and you're seeing that in the trend, like assuming that that keeps going. I wish the government kept handing out money, but obviously, obviously that's not happening. So, talk to me about, what are some never cut investments when you're putting some pressure on a brand to tighten things up a little. What are the top three things that you'd say, hey, just don't cut these ever?
I mean, number one always is quality.
Yeah.
Right. Like I mean, it's probably the most obvious one, but the minute you start cutting quality,
Mhm.
you're impacting the DNA of the brand. And I always say we're investing in this brand because we think it's a great brand, right? The last thing we want to do is do anything to hurt it. So let's start there and protect the DNA and the core elements of the brand
Mhm.
and the quality. And then, I think training, as I said before, cutting on training is always easy because there's typically not a measurable ROI to it, but the long-term impact it has to the business. We did a study the other day of training and turnover, and, there really is a direct correlation, very tight, between as people become better trained, they stay in the business longer. And, turnover, I always say there's this flywheel where, you invest in your people. If you invest in your people, like in training, right, they stay longer in training, and there's other areas where you may invest in them, but, they stay longer. If they stay longer, they execute better against the guest. If they execute better against the guest, you do more business and your guests return more often. You do more business, you can invest in your team member, and it creates this flywheel, right? So,
Yep.
I think training is a big piece of it. And I think the other thing that you have to be very careful about are labor minimums, right?
Mhm.
People oftentimes look at it and say, oh, I can cut labor because, again, you have the most control over it. It's most expensive. But you do have to understand what the minimums are, especially at peak periods, because otherwise, you'll really start impacting the guest.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I love that you said training because I feel like people want to do a good job. And when they're trained on doing it, like they're so much happier and the business runs better. And so I think that that's a really good one
Yeah.
for people to take away. On the flip side, like what is cuttable? Where you're like, hey, these are the three things I'd walk in and just say, hey, you could probably lose these, or what you've found in some of the experiences that you've had.
I mean, there's been some like janitorial's been a little bit of a low-hanging fruit, where we've seen somebody's coming in and cleaning the back of the house kitchen floors twice a week. And is that really necessary? Can the team member do it before they leave? So, some of the janitorial stuff, we've seen some opportunity. I mean, really, we look at, and it's not quite answering the question, but hours of operation, are there hours to cut that can improve the overall performance of the business? And maybe, you know, team members might be happier because they're getting home a little earlier, or they're not getting hours. It could cut both ways. And then, also maybe not answering the question, but like closing underperforming stores is something that it's sort of like a cut, right? It's a cut to the business, but oftentimes when I'm working with like even some smaller businesses, I'm like the best decision you can make sometime, just the I always say there's a limit to financial capital and human capital, right? And on the human capital, you want to deploy your dollars as efficiently as possible on the financial capital side. On the human capital, it's the same thing, right? So, if you're deploying a lot of human capital against a store that probably is never going to become profitable, and you could take that same human capital and deploy it against a highly profitable store and have those dollars drop, it's so
Mhm.
much more efficient, right? So, I'm not quite answering your question, but
I think that's yeah, that's interesting because that's one of the hardest things to do too, having, been an operator and like sometimes those locations like have your heart. It's a tough decision to make, but you're totally right. Like where do you want to invest your time, your money, your effort? And I think you got to make some of those tough decisions and it really does help the business and help give you peace of mind too.
agreed.
Let's see. Talk to me about a moment where operations or facilities coming in saved a brand or broken it.
Yeah, I mean, we invest in a business in Sizzling Platter. It was an acquisition of another franchisee and one of the systems we were in. And I want to say we knew it going in, but I don't think we estimated the amount of repairs and maintenance that had to be done.
Yeah.
And I think if that business continued to operate the way it did, I think they would have had some serious health and safety issues. Some safety and sanitation stuff were happening. Some of the cooling equipment wasn't working. It was in the high 40s. And so that was a situation where we got in, we quickly invested very heavily in fixing a lot of the equipment that was broken. Um, and what we found was it trickled down to the team member, which was very interesting. And so it kind of saved the business and turned it around at the same time because the team members didn't like working in an environment where everything was broken all the time and the knives weren't sharpened and the air conditioning wasn't working and they didn't have I mean, in some situations they didn't have mop buckets. They were going back and forth between the mop sink. So like, just things like that where you go in, you make the investment, and not only does it save the business because it would have at some point we would have, hurt somebody. But the positive impact it had on the culture was very interesting.
Yeah. And there's so many things that impact that. I mean, HVAC working, like I know if it's hot, I have left a job because it was too hot and I was sweating. I was like, I could not handle this. And so, yeah, I think that's 100% right. It's like making sure your team feels comfortable, your guest feels comfortable, like the long-term effect that can have on a business is so critical.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about aligning priorities across teams. You've got facilities, you got operations, you got finance teams, and you've worked with a lot of different teams. Like, how do you try to get everybody aligned on prioritizing what makes the most sense for the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important piece of leadership is priority. I find that people like to they do what they like to do. In
Yeah,
some cases, maybe the highest priority item to do. And so, going back to, really good leaders that, have a lot of trust from their teams, right? And they're very collaborative. They're very clear on the North Star. They're very clear on how we're all contributing to that common goal. I think, it just naturally yields like a lot of collaboration among your team.
yeah,
And so like, what I like the healthy tension of marketing saying I need more dollars, operations saying I need more training, facilities saying I need more investment and facilities, and really dissecting it down to, again, the fact-based decision making of what are the highest priorities, what are going to, really generate the most value to the business. And let's
Mhm.
have a discussion around it and let's really be truth seeking. Yes, marketing, you can drive sales, but a lot of times it's unquantifiable. We have all these, likes on Instagram, but our traffic hasn't changed.
Show me the
Or,
dollars.
yeah.
Yep.
And that's why, like a lot of times on facilities, and we just had a discussion with one of our portfolio partners recently, and they were doing this and that. And I was like, why don't you paint the outside a slightly different color and spend some money on exterior lighting, especially as we're rolling into the winter when it gets darker faster and our building's going to pop. And, that's not, a very expensive addition to what we were already going to do, but it's going to have a lot more impact than what was being initially proposed. So I think, there's an honest dialogue about some of that stuff, and making sure everybody's aligned and collaborating.
I think that's part of the fun is some of that tension and seeing people fight for their, what they think is most important. I think that's how teams come together. So
Yep.
that's amazing.
Agreed.
So as an interim CFO or CEO, when you're coming into teams and situations where you weren't selected or you're new to the new to the company, how do you earn trust and how do you get buy-in from the team quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, trust is not declared or announced, it's earned, right? For it to be authentic. And it's a very important part of being a good leader is having your team trust you. And trust really goes both ways, right? The people that, are reporting to you, and then, we have boards as CEOs that we report into,
Right.
and understanding how we can make sure that they trust us, right? And I think, in a situation like what you're talking about, what I typically do is I go in with a lot of humility and a lot of listening and a lot of learning about the business, and don't think that I know better, but I look similar to when we were acquiring a business and, tell me what they do better than we do, really trying to understand how the business operates at its core. And then I can slowly look for opportunities and talk through those again in a very collaborative way where I may not have all the answers. Maybe I have a thought on a particular topic and I've learned that I'm wrong in how I'm thinking about it because they've tried that strategy before and here's what happened. But really being honest with, yourself about, making sure that they understand that you're listening to them and you're trying to learn how the business operates before you're trying to change things. And I think once you earn that trust, it's a game changer.
I think that's great for anyone in a leadership role is like really listening, learning, earning the trust. I think that's huge. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Here's my favorite part, rapid fire question time. Get to learn a little bit more about you. Talk to me about a hidden talent that you have that we wouldn't expect.
My very first job was I was a magician for little kids' birthday
No
parties,
way.
junior high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went around and did all kinds of events, but so I have some pretty good card tricks.
Oh my God, I love it. Did you wear the hat and everything in the
I
cave?
wore the hat. My name was Jim Beanie. It was extremely embarrassing in hindsight. I
I
actually
love it. I think we need to bring that back sometime. Talk to me about something you're currently obsessed with. Food, shows, podcast, book, anything goes.
I'm definitely going to throw a curveball here. So, a huge interest of mine is quantum physics. I'm very obsessed with how close we're becoming to understanding things at a subatomic level and what that means. We're all made up of energy, as you know, and
Mhm.
understanding how that energy interacts with each other is extremely interesting.
I love
And yeah, and much more like on the theoretical side, because
that.
the non-theoretical is what they're trying to prove out. But I'm interested in how they're thinking about what's out there at a quantum level and how it works.
Oh my God, I love that. I feel like we could have a whole conversation around that. Give me the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you.
Um, I'm a tennis player, and I had a friend of mine who was like, world-class tennis player and would periodically coach me. And I had an injury that was extremely aggravating to me, and I got very angry one day on the court, and he grabbed me by the neck and he pulled me over to the end of the fence of the tennis court, and he said, Jim, he said, don't waste your energy getting angry about something you can't control. And it stuck with me for a long time, and it has a lot of different applications, right?
Love it.
But it is a severe waste, distraction, unnecessary behavior to be angry about something that's out of your control. Look to see what you can control and how to correct things, but when you can't control them, be aware of it.
I love that. I think that's awesome. Give me one metric that you always have your eye on.
Labor efficiency is probably the big one.
Yeah.
Back to a big item we can control and understanding, the efficiency, mainly because, are there team members that can get the same work done much faster? What are they doing differently? How do we train the other people to do it that way? Is it truly because they're tenured, or is it because they're doing it a different way?
Yeah.
Really peeling the onion back on efficiency is one of the metrics that I focus on very heavily.
It's awesome. Give me your biggest pet peeve when you walk into a restaurant.
I mean, I'm going to give you a real restaurant one. It's bad culture, right? And you can see that from a dirty restaurant to the greet to the, condiment stand to, tape over the menu board. If the culture is not there, it
There's
trickles down, and you can see it pretty quickly in so many different ways. And so culture is, it's not an easy one, but it's a very important one.
Yeah, I love that. And it's definitely noticeable when you walk in for sure. All right. What is one piece of technology or tool that you refuse to live without, other than Ecotrak, obviously?
I mean, it depends on the business, but combi ovens are fantastic. They're expensive, they break down, but as you think about like some of the evolution in technology and restaurant equipment, that's one you have to point to and say they did something right here. You know, I'm a huge combi oven fan, so I won't mention a brand name, but I'm a huge
Smart.
product.
They'll come after you. Awesome. Well, I mean, this is great. I've got a couple closing questions here. With over 90 brands in the Capital Spring family, what's your personal go-to order that you just love and have to have?
No, Matt, you're asking me to pick my favorite child. I can't do that.
Favorite food.
Um, I'll pick one that doesn't have a competitor.
There you
We have a steakhouse brand that does a fantastic prime rib.
go. Ooh,
Every time we go there, I order it, and it's amazing. I think they slow roast it overnight, like it's incredible. So that's probably my go-to.
all right. We'll leave that. We'll leave the brand out, but prime rib does sound good. You're making me hungry. Obviously, you just answered this one. Is there a specific piece of restaurant equipment that seems to have, oh no, this is actually a personal vendetta against you where it just
Uh,
seems to constantly break down no matter what you do?
Turbo Chefs, definitely,
Happy to
definitely,
share that brand name.
or Merry Chefs. I both of them. They both have
They're
quite a
just,
bit.
they've got something against you.
They're a pain point for sure.
Uh, Looking ahead, what's the next big challenge facing restaurant operators over the next 5 years, and who's positioned to win?
I mean, I don't know who's positioned to win. Definitely the balance of bringing in what's going to be this abundance of improvements through efficiencies across everything we do in the restaurant space, balanced with that hospitality component, right?
Yeah,
That people are still going to go in there for some sort of experience, even in takeout, and maybe I'm just taking a page out of Nichols' book, but we try to write on some of the to-go packaging, thanks for ordering from us, have a great day, whatever. Like just the hospitality piece, regardless of the revenue channel, balancing that with, you know, we're going to start to see this data come in that says you could do this so much more efficiently. You can do this, you can make this change and that change. And I think, those who win, maybe without naming a name, but the kind of the skeleton of who's going to win are those people that balance those two, the efficiency of what we see with how to deliver really good hospitality.
I love that. And I order takeout constantly because I do not cook. And that personal touch, like that's what makes me go back. Like I love it. I think it's awesome. And like that really does create brand loyalty. So, and it's little stuff too. It doesn't, take a lot of time, but it's, the thought that counts really. So, let's see. After 40 years, what advice would you give to the next generation of operations and facilities leaders coming up right now?
I mean, look, I would say AI is easier to use than you think.
Hmm.
And, if you're, first of all, I would say congratulations to anybody that's using their hands because that's one of the few jobs that won't be replaced with AI, right?
Very true.
If you're fixing a piece of equipment or working on it or installing it and you're using your hands, um, your job security is a lot safer than somebody that's working on code or software development for sure, or financial analysis. But, what I think where it could help them and what they should start to do is play around a little bit with, okay, let me start entering in, when I repaired this, where was it positioned in the restaurant? Is the hood, type one? Like, I think if you start to feed some data in, just with your everyday activities, it will help improve your performance over the long term and you'll get more comfortable using it. And
Yeah.
I think you'll find some application. So that would be my advice.
I love it. That's amazing. Everybody listen up. All right. Talk to me about anything exciting coming up with Capital Spring that you can share or want to share with the group.
We're about to close on our first international investment in
Wow.
Italy, which is super interesting.
Amazing.
Huge fan of the brand. I went out there and tasted it, and I'm going to be working hard on that business. Not that there's a lot to do because it's growing like a weed, but um, we had a first close on our fund, so that's going well. So if anybody out there is looking for a capital partner, we'd love to talk to you.
Good
Small
plug.
business, even if the facilities are in tough shape, we're open. Um, but yeah, so we have some money raised. We'd like to go invest in some great businesses and some great partners, and I'm really excited about that. Finding
That's
that
awesome.
those next brands.
Well, shoot, if you need any help in Italy, I do love it there. So, well, I will share. When I met you, I was super intimidated. You have such a big legacy in the restaurant industry, and getting to know you, I think you're just such an awesome person, and you're so genuine. And I love getting to hang out with you. So, really appreciate you joining us today on Facilities Unfiltered. I'm going to go ahead and share your email for those that are looking for a capital partner for anyone that wants to get in touch with Jim or ask any questions. Super great guy. So let me share that with the group here. Any last remarks that you want to share with the group before I'll let you go?
I think that's it, Matt. You've asked all the questions, and I enjoy every minute I spend with you.
Aw, same. Well, you are the best, and want to thank everyone else for joining today. I also want to send out, or I will send out the recording after this. So you can catch the full episode there or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So stay tuned for our next episode as we continue spotlighting the people behind the spaces that power today's most innovative brands. With that, thank you so much, Jim. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Take
Bye,
care. Have a good
everybody.
weekend.
Have a good one. Talk soon.